The morning was quiet in the small town, the kind of quiet that makes every sound stand out. Birds chirped softly in the trees, and the wind moved gently through the streets. But beneath that calm, a heaviness hung in the air. Today was the day the town would say goodbye to a little girl. She had died unexpectedly, and no one fully understood how. Her house still seemed to carry her presence, with toys left where she had been playing, and her little shoes by the door. People whispered quietly as they walked past, unsure what to say or do. The grief felt heavy, pressing on everyone, from neighbors to strangers who had only heard about her death. Families gathered at the small cemetery, their faces pale and eyes red from crying. Mothers held their children close, and fathers tried to stay strong, standing tall though their hearts were breaking. People who had known the girl, and those who hadn't, came together, sharing a common sorrow. Flowers in all colors were arranged neatly on the ground, their bright petals a small attempt to bring warmth to such a sad day. The coffin was small, just the right size for her little body. It had been painted white, with delicate carvings on its sides. A soft ribbon wrapped around it, a simple gesture meant to show love. Even in the middle of grief, among the mourners, a few uniformed officers stood quietly, paying their respects while keeping an eye on the crowd. They had been called not just to support the family, but because the circumstances of the girl's death were not entirely clear. There were questions, though no one yet had answers. One of the officers had brought a companion, a police dog named Rex. Rex was trained to assist in investigations. He had a keen sense for things that humans often missed. He could detect substances, track people, and sense when something was not right. He was calm most of the time, obedient and focused, but he also had instincts that even his handler could not explain. As the ceremony began, the coffin was slowly lowered into the ground. Everyone watched with silent grief, some holding back tears, others letting them fall freely. The wind moved gently, carrying the soft sounds of whispered prayers. Flowers were laid on top of the coffin, and a few children scattered petals into the air. The atmosphere was heavy with sadness, yet calm, as though the world itself was holding its breath. But then, something unexpected happened. Rex, the police dog, stiffened. His ears pricked up, and his nose twitched as he stepped closer to the coffin. At first, the officers thought he was just curious, reacting to the scent of so many flowers. But then Rex barked, sharply and insistently. It was not a casual bark. It was urgent, almost desperate. The handler called his name softly, trying to calm him, but Rex ignored him. He continued barking, growling softly under his breath, circling the coffin. The dog's eyes were fixed on the small white box, as if trying to tell everyone something. The crowd turned, startled by the sudden noise. The quiet had been broken, and everyone felt a sudden tension. Some people looked at each other, confused. Why was the dog barking like that? It was unusual behavior, especially at such a moment. Normally, Rex was calm in public, especially in solemn situations. The officers whispered among themselves, exchanging worried glances. The dog's instincts were rarely wrong, and when he reacted this way, it usually meant something important. The little girl's parents stood frozen, holding each other. They had expected tears and grief, not a dog barking at their child's coffin. Their eyes followed Rex as he moved around the grave, sniffing, pawing gently at the ground. It was almost as if he could sense something that no one else could. A few of the officers stepped closer, keeping an eye on the dog while trying to understand what was happening. They had worked with Rex for years, and they knew when he was alerting them to something serious. Neighbors whispered quietly, speculating about the dog's behavior. "Maybe he senses something," one said softly. Another shook their head. "It's just a dog. Maybe he's upset like we are." But the officers knew better. They had seen Rex's reactions before, how he could detect fear, danger, or even hidden evidence. They had never seen him act like this at a funeral. The urgency in his movements and the intensity of his barking made it clear that he was not just reacting to the scene. He was reacting to something buried, something unseen. As the ceremony continued, the handler tried to get Rex to calm down. He knelt beside the dog, speaking softly, holding the leash gently. "Rex, it's okay. It's okay. Quiet now." But Rex pulled slightly, refusing to be distracted. He sniffed the air near the coffin, pawed at the ground, and growled softly. The handler's heart pounded in his chest. He had a sense that the dog's behavior was telling them something very important, something no one else could see. The coffin reached the bottom of the grave, and the mourners stepped back. The moment felt heavier than ever, almost suffocating. The officers whispered quietly among themselves, deciding what to do next. They could not ignore Rex's behavior, not when it was so unusual and intense. The dog had never been wrong in situations like this. He could sense things hidden to humans, detect danger, and uncover secrets buried in the most unlikely places. As the mourners began to place the final flowers and say their goodbyes, Rex barked again. This time it was louder, more insistent, as if he was trying to lead someone to the truth. The handler followed his gaze, noticing that the dog was fixated on one corner of the grave. He knelt down beside Rex, trying to see what he was reacting to. There was nothing obvious, just soil, flowers, and the wooden coffin. But Rex's behavior suggested otherwise. The crowd started to notice the dog's determination. Some people stepped closer, curious and worried. Others whispered prayers, unsure if the dog's behavior was a sign or something more. The air felt heavier, filled with tension and unease. Everyone seemed to sense that something was not right, even if they could not explain it. The little girl's parents held each other tightly, their eyes fixed on the small white coffin, while fear and confusion spread through their hearts. The officers decided that they needed to investigate further. They could not ignore what Rex was trying to tell them. After the ceremony ended and the mourners began to leave, they carefully approached the grave. The handler let Rex move closer, watching his every move. The dog sniffed the ground, pawed gently, and growled softly again. It was clear that Rex had detected something significant, something hidden beneath the surface. The officer in charge of the investigation spoke quietly to his team. "We need to be careful, but we also need to pay attention. Rex doesn't act like this without reason. Let's take notes and document everything." The team nodded, their faces serious. They knew that this was the beginning of something important, something that might reveal the truth about the little girl's death. As they worked, the small town remained quiet. The wind continued to move through the trees, carrying the scent of flowers and earth. The sun shone softly, casting long shadows over the cemetery. But beneath the calm, a sense of unease lingered. Something had been uncovered, something that no one had expected. The dog's behavior had changed the atmosphere, bringing a tension that refused to fade. The officers carefully marked the spots where Rex had been most active. They took photographs, recorded observations, and made plans for the next steps. It was clear that the dog had detected something unusual, something that required further attention. The handler looked at Rex and patted him gently. "Good boy, Rex. You're telling us something important. Let's find out what it is." Rex wagged his tail slightly, but remained alert, his nose still twitching, his eyes focused. He had done his job well, and now it was up to the officers to follow his lead. By the time the funeral was over and the last mourners had left, the officers felt a mix of grief and determination. They knew that the little girl's death was not as simple as it seemed. The dog had pointed them in a direction they could not ignore. The community would remember the day not only for its sadness, but also for the strange and urgent behavior of a dog that refused to remain silent. Rex had spoken in the only way he could, and now it was up to the humans to listen and uncover the truth. The small town returned to its usual quiet, but something had shifted. The wind through the trees seemed heavier, and the air carried a sense of mystery. The officers drove back to the station, their minds full of questions. What had Rex detected? Why had he reacted so strongly? And most importantly, what did it mean for the investigation into the little girl's death? One thing was clear. The story was far from over, and the dog had just opened the first chapter of a mystery that would shake the town to its core. Even as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the cemetery, the officers knew that they could not rest. Rex had done his part, but the real work was only beginning. The little girl's story was not finished, and the truth behind her death was still hidden, waiting to be uncovered. The dog had led them to the first clue, and it was up to them to follow it, no matter where it might lead. The night fell quietly over the town, but inside the hearts of those who had been at the funeral, a sense of urgency lingered. Something important had been revealed, even if it was not yet fully understood. And somewhere in the shadows, Rex rested, alert and watchful, ready to guide the officers toward the answers they needed. The town would never forget the day a dog had barked desperately at a coffin, warning everyone that there was more to the saint. Or than anyone could see. After the funeral, the officers could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. Rex's behavior had been too deliberate to ignore. Normally, at funerals, he would sit calmly beside his handler, alert but quiet. Today had been different. His constant barking, pawing at the ground, and insistence on circling the coffin suggested that he had detected something hidden, something that needed attention. The officers gathered quietly in a small room at the station to discuss what to do next. Rex isn't just reacting to grief, one of them said, his voice low and serious. He reacts when he senses something unusual, something that doesn't belong. His eyes met the handlers, who nodded. He had known the dog for years and trusted his instincts completely. We have to follow him. Whatever he smelled or felt, it's worth looking into. The team began reviewing all the information they had about the little girl. She had been healthy, a bright child who loved to play and laugh. There were no known illnesses, and nothing in her recent medical records suggested that she was in danger. But Rex's reaction told them otherwise. The officers decided to go back to the girl's home to start a more thorough investigation. They needed to see if there was anything they had missed, anything that could explain the dog's unusual behavior. The house was small but cozy, filled with the kind of warmth only a family home could have. Photos of the little girl adorned the walls, her smiling face captured in countless snapshots. Toys were scattered across the floor, a mix of dolls, stuffed animals, and building blocks. Everything looked normal, almost peaceful. But the officers knew better. They had learned to trust subtle clues, small details that told stories even when everything seemed perfect. Rex walked slowly through the house, sniffing carefully, his ears alert. He paused at the little girl's bedroom door and let out a low growl. The handler stepped forward, giving him space but staying close. The room was filled with her belongings. Tiny clothes neatly folded in drawers, a small bed covered with a colorful blanket, and shelves lined with books and toys. At first glance, everything seemed ordinary. But Rex would not settle. He kept circling the room, pawing at the floor, and sniffing with intensity. The officers noticed that his focus was on a small corner of the room near the window. There was a slight disturbance in the carpet, a part that looked like it had been moved recently. The officer in charge knelt down and gently lifted the corner. Underneath, they found a small box, worn and slightly dusty. It was not locked, but it had clearly been hidden. Inside, they discovered a few personal items belonging to the little girl: notes, drawings, and a small diary. The diary seemed torn in places, with some pages missing. One officer carefully opened it, reading the entries silently. The handwriting was small and careful, the words revealing thoughts and feelings that were not shared with anyone else. Some entries described her daily life, the games she played, and the friends she had. But other pages hinted at fear and worry. She wrote about being scared of someone, feeling alone, and wanting someone to notice when she was upset. It was subtle, but the officers could see the signs of distress. The little girl had been trying to tell someone something, but no one had understood. The handler looked at Rex, who was still alert, sniffing around the edges of the room. "Good boy," he said softly. "You're right. There's more here than we realized." Rex wagged his tail slightly, but his focus never wavered. He seemed to understand that the humans were beginning to follow the trail he had sensed. The officers decided to check the rest of the house carefully. They moved methodically, room by room, paying attention to anything out of place. In the kitchen, everything appeared normal, dishes washed, counters clean, but Rex paused by the trash bin, sniffing urgently. The officers found nothing dangerous there, but it reminded them that sometimes clues were hidden in plain sight. Even ordinary objects could reveal important information when viewed carefully. In the living room, Rex stopped again, growling softly. The officers approached and noticed that a small vent near the floor had been slightly loosened. One officer carefully removed the vent cover and peered inside. It was empty, but it had been used recently. The subtle signs added up. Someone had been trying to hide things, or perhaps even cover up actions that should never have happened. The officers felt a chill, realizing that the little girl's life had not been as safe as it seemed. Neighbors were asked quietly if they had noticed anything unusual. Some said that she was always cheerful, that she seemed happy, and that she played with friends after school. But a few recalled moments when she seemed hesitant, withdrawn, or scared for reasons they did not understand. One neighbor mentioned seeing an adult entering the house late at night, looking frustrated and angry. It was a small detail, but in combination with Rex's behavior and the diary entries, it painted a troubling picture. The officers began to piece together the puzzle. They considered the possibility that the girl's death might not have been an accident. The dog's reactions, the diary, and the subtle signs around the house all pointed toward hidden danger. They decided to involve a forensic expert to examine the home more thoroughly. It was important to handle everything carefully, preserving evidence that could reveal the truth. The forensic team arrived the next day, moving quietly and efficiently. They examined the house from top to bottom, documenting every detail. Floors were checked for disturbances, walls for hidden compartments, and furniture for signs of tampering. Throughout it all, Rex remained by the handler's side, guiding them with his instincts. Whenever the dog paused and focused on a spot, the experts took note, knowing that he might detect things invisible to human eyes. During the search, they found more hidden clues. A small drawer had been taped shut under the desk in the girl's room. Inside were notes that revealed attempts to reach out for help, short messages written in haste, expressing fear and frustration. The handwriting was young but desperate. It became clear that she had been trying to communicate something important, something that had gone unnoticed. The officers also reviewed medical reports and records from the past few months. While nothing initially appeared abnormal, a closer look revealed inconsistencies. Some visits to the doctor had been recorded as routine checkups, but there were notes about minor injuries and unexplained bruises. Nothing had seemed serious at the time, but now, with the other evidence, it raised concern. The little girl's life had been complicated, and signs of trouble had been missed or misunderstood. As they worked, the team became more determined. They realized that the story of the little girl's death was far from simple. Rex had led them here, and now it was up to the humans to follow through. Eve. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, had to be examined carefully. The dog's instincts had pointed them toward the truth, and it was their responsibility to uncover it. The investigation also revealed something unexpected. The little girl's interactions with those around her had been carefully observed by the dog. He had noticed fear, hesitation, and changes in her behavior that no human had picked up on. Rex had become a silent witness, responding to signals that only he could detect. His barking at the coffin had been the first alarm, and now, piece by piece, the picture was becoming clearer. The officers held a meeting to plan the next steps. They knew they had to speak to the parents and close family members, asking questions carefully, without causing unnecessary distress. They also needed to continue documenting every clue in the house and any additional evidence outside of it. The diary, the notes, the signs of disturbance in the home, all of these had to be preserved and analyzed. Throughout this process, the small town watched quietly. People whispered about the unusual behavior of the dog and the sudden attention from the police. Rumors began to circulate, though few understood the full story. Some were concerned, some curious, and some simply saddened by the thought that a child's life might have been more complicated than they had imagined. At the end of the day, the officers gathered back at the station, tired but focused. They reviewed the evidence, carefully cataloging everything. Rex lay at the handler's feet, resting but alert, as if he knew that the work was far from over. The handler reached down and gently patted him. "Good job, Rex. We're starting to see the truth." "Thanks to you." The dog wagged his tail slightly, content that he had led them to important discoveries. As night fell over the town, the officers reflected on the day's events. They had uncovered signs of fear and hidden distress, clues that no one else had noticed. The little girl's life, though short, had contained signals that something was wrong, and it was Rex who had brought them to light. The diary, the notes, and the subtle disturbances in the home were all pieces of a puzzle that was only beginning to take shape. The quiet of the night contrasted with the intensity of the investigation. Streetlights cast long shadows over empty streets, and the wind moved gently through the trees, carrying a sense of unease. The officers knew that the next steps would be difficult. They would need to speak to family members, gather more evidence, and carefully piece together the final picture. But they also knew that they were on the right path. Rex had given them the direction, and now it was their responsibility to follow through. By the time the town was asleep, the investigation had taken a significant turn. What had started as a quiet funeral was now the beginning of a deeper search for the truth. The little girl's story was slowly emerging, and the dog's instincts had opened a door that no one else had even known existed. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest signals, a bark, a note, a subtle gesture, could lead to discoveries that change everything. The officers prepared for the next day, knowing that they were only at the start of uncovering the mystery. Rex rested, but he remained watchful, ready to guide them further. The little girl's voice, silent in life, was beginning to be heard through the signs she had left behind. And the truth, whatever it may, the next morning, the town was waking slowly under a gray sky. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that made every small sound seem louder than usual. Inside the police station, the officers were already at work, reviewing the notes from the previous day's investigation. Rex lay near the handler's feet, alert but calm, his ears twitching at every sound. His behavior yesterday had pointed them in the right direction, and today they planned to follow it even further. The officers had decided to focus on the little girl's home first. Even though they had already gone through it once, they knew there were places they had not examined closely enough. The house was small, but it held countless details that could provide clues. Every corner, every drawer, and every object could tell a story if looked at carefully. The diary and notes they had found yesterday hinted that someone in her life might have caused her fear. The officers needed to find out who and how. As they entered the house, Rex immediately became alert. He sniffed the air, his body tense but focused. He walked slowly, methodically, moving from room to room. The officers followed him quietly, watching how he reacted. It was clear that he had remembered what he had sensed yesterday and was eager to guide them toward any new discoveries. The handler whispered softly, "Good boy, Rex. Let's find more clues." Rex's attention returned to the girl's bedroom. He stopped by the small desk in the corner, sniffing the edges carefully. The officers approached and examined the desk more closely. One of the drawers had been taped shut, but the tape had loosened slightly over time. Inside, they found folded pieces of paper, carefully hidden. They were letters, some addressed to imaginary friends, some to adults she trusted. The words in them were simple, but filled with fear and a desire for help. She wrote about being scared at home, about someone who made her cry, and about moments when she felt unsafe. One officer read the letters aloud quietly, so that only the teen could hear. The words were heartbreaking. They revealed a child trying to communicate something serious, but no one had understood her cries for help. The officers realized that the little girl had been living with fear for weeks, maybe months, before her death. Every word she wrote was a silent warning, a message that had gone unnoticed. Rex had reacted at the funeral because he had sensed that the danger she faced was real. Even after she had passed, the officers decided to move to other areas of the house. In the living room, Rex paused by the fireplace. He sniffed around the hearth and growled softly, pawing at the floor. The officers checked carefully and found a small piece of fabric wedged in the corner, stained but hidden from plain view. It was a clue, subtle but important, that someone had tried to conceal. The officers carefully collected it for analysis, understanding that even small details could be key to solving the mystery dot in the kitchen. Rex's nose led him to the pantry. He sniffed at a stack of boxes and then at a small cabinet near the floor. Inside the cabinet, the officers found more hidden notes, some crumpled, some folded neatly. The words again spoke of fear and sadness, describing moments when the girl had felt alone and unheard. The officers took photographs and carefully documented every piece of evidence. Each item added to a growing picture of what had happened in the girl's life. The teen decided to check outside as well. Rex led them to the backyard, where he paused near a small shed. The officers opened it and found signs that someone had been using it recently, even though it had appeared empty at first glance. There were scraps of paper, small toys, and a few items that belonged to the little girl. The presence of these items suggested that someone had moved them or tried to hide them. The officers made careful notes, understanding that the shed might have been used to conceal important evidence. Neighbors were asked again if they had seen anything unusual. Some had noticed that the girl sometimes appeared hesitant to go into the house, or that she would stand by the window, looking outside as if waiting for someone. Others recalled seeing her upset after being with certain adults, though they had never realized the significance of those moments. The officers listened carefully, documenting every detail. They knew that small observations, when combined with other evidence, could reveal a larger story. Meanwhile, the forensic team analyzed the letters, fabric, and other items collected from the house. They found that some of the fabric contained traces of substances that suggested it had been used in ways that could be harmful. The notes and letters were studied for handwriting patterns and potential clues about the adults in the child's life. Everything pointed to the fact that the little girl had been in distress and that someone close to her had caused her fear. The officers also began reviewing photographs and videos taken during her short life. Birthday parties, school events, and family gatherings were examined carefully. In some images, they noticed subtle signs of tension, an adult's hand gripping too tightly, expressions of frustration or impatience, and moments when the girl appeared frightened. The evidence was piecing together slowly, but the pattern was becoming clear. The little girl's death had not been simple or natural. Rex continued to assist them. His instincts guided the officers to areas they might have overlooked. He led them to a corner of the basement where a small trapdoor had been partially hidden by a rug. The officers opened it cautiously and found old toys and clothing, items that had been moved or concealed. There were no immediate signs of danger, but the careful arrangement suggested that someone had tried to hide evidence or activity from plain sight. The officers documented everything, knowing that the details could be important in understanding the full story. The team met again at the station to review their findings. They pieced together the timeline of the little girl's life, using diary entries, notes, and observations from neighbors. The picture that emerged was troubling. The girl had been trying to communicate fear and distress for months. She had been alone in her struggle, and the adults around her had not fully understood what she needed. Every detail, no matter how small, was a testament to her aura. Emp's to be heard. The officers decided to speak with the parents and family members carefully. They approached them not as accusers, but as investigators trying to understand the full story. Questions were asked about routines, interactions, and behaviors that might explain the girl's fear. Some answers were vague or inconsistent, which raised further concern. The officers made careful notes, documenting every response. Their goal was not to blame prematurely, but to uncover the truth. Piece by piece, the investigation also turned to the community. Teachers, friends, and neighbors were asked to provide any information about the girl's behavior or interactions. A teacher mentioned that the girl had once hesitated to participate in class because she seemed worried about something at home. Another neighbor recalled seeing her looking anxious before entering the house after school. These small details, when combined with the evidence from the home, created a clearer picture of the challenges the girl had faced. Throughout the process, Rex remained an invaluable part of the team. His ability to sense fear, detect hidden items, and alert the officers to subtle clues was unmatched. The dog had acted as a silent witness, noticing what humans often missed. His behavior at the funeral had been the first signal that something was wrong. And now, with the investigation unfolding, it was clear that his instincts had been correct. By the end of the day, the officers had gathered a significant amount of evidence. Letters, notes, photographs, hidden items, and observations from neighbors all pointed to the fact that the little girl had been living in fear. The dog's role in uncovering these clues could not be overstated. Rex had sensed danger that humans had overlooked, guiding them to areas and details that might otherwise have remained hidden. As night fell, the officers reviewed the day's findings one last time. The little girl's life, though short, was now being understood in a way that honored her attempts to be heard. Every clue, every note, and every observation was a step closer to the truth. The investigation was far from over, but the direction was clear. The dog had pointed them toward the hidden danger, and the humans were following the path he had illuminated. The town remained quiet under the dark sky, unaware of the depth of the investigation unfolding behind closed doors. The little girl's story was beginning to emerge, revealing a life filled with small cries for help that had gone unnoticed until now. The officers were determined to uncover the full truth, knowing that justice and understanding depended on careful attention to every detail. Rex rested by the handler's side, alert but calm, as if understanding the importance of the work. His instincts had been right from the beginning, and now it was up to the officers to act on the evidence he had helped them uncover. The little girl's voice, though silent in life, was slowly being heard through the clues she had left behind. The next steps would involve careful questioning, forensic analysis, and continued observation. But the foundation had been laid. The dog had barked at the coffin, guiding them to clues that had otherwise remained hidden. Now, the investigation was moving forward, piece by piece, toward the truth that had been concealed for too long. The night settled over the small town, but the story was far from over. The little girl's life, the fear she had experienced, and the warnings she had left behind were beginning to be understood. The officers prepared for the days ahead, knowing that the path would be difficult but necessary. Rex lay at their side, ready to guide them further, his instincts sharp and unwavering. And so the investigation continued, moving carefully and deliberately toward uncovering the shocking truth. The little girl's story, hidden in plain sight, was slowly emerging, revealing the danger she had faced and the courage she had shown in trying to be heard. With every piece of evidence, the officers grew closer to understanding what had happened. Determined to bring clarity, justice, and closure to a life that had been far too short, GHTB was slowly coming to light. The following morning was colder than usual, with a sharp wind moving through the town and rustling dry leaves across the streets. The officers arrived early at the police station, their minds heavy with the findings from the previous days. Rex, the police dog, was already alert, waiting beside his handler. He seemed to sense that today would be important. The events of the last few days had brought them closer to understanding what had happened to the little girl. But no one knew exactly what they would find next. The team decided to focus on the parents, accounts, and the adults who had been around the girl most often. They planned to ask questions in a careful, methodical way, hoping to uncover details that might explain her fear and distress. But they also knew that sometimes people hid things without even realizing it, whether out of habit, guilt, or fear. Rex would accompany them, his instincts helping to sense tension, discomfort, or signs that someone was hiding information. They arrived at the house once again, this time approaching with caution. The parents were present, and the atmosphere was tense. The officers introduced themselves politely and explained that they were trying to understand everything about the little girl's last days. They emphasized that their goal was not to blame anyone immediately, but to gather facts. Rex sat quietly nearby, observing the people in the room with alert eyes. His body tensed. The questioning began slowly. The parents answered in short sentences, sometimes pausing, sometimes glancing at each other nervously. The officers noticed inconsistencies, small details that did not match the timeline or previous statements. Each time a contradiction appeared, Rex twitched, his ears rising slightly, his eyes never leaving the people. It was as if he understood that these inconsistencies were important. The officers made careful notes, documenting every detail, no matter how minor it seemed. After several hours of questioning, the team decided it was time to examine other areas of the house that had previously seemed ordinary. Rex led them to the basement, where a small trapdoor had been partially hidden under a rug. It was dusty and rarely used, but the dog's focus made it clear that something significant was there. The officers opened the trapdoor carefully and found a small, concealed space. Inside were several items that immediately caught their attention: old toys, personal belongings, and pieces of clothing, some of which appeared to be deliberately hidden. One of the officers carefully documented each item. The items suggested that someone had moved them intentionally, trying to hide them from view. It was a small but important clue. Every hidden object raised more questions. Why were they concealed? And what did they reveal about the people around the girl? The dog paced quietly, occasionally sniffing a corner or growling softly, as if urging the officers to look closer. The officers decided to bring in forensic experts to analyze the items in the hidden space. They took photographs, collected samples, and packaged everything carefully. The forensic team examined fabrics, surfaces, and even dust particles, searching for traces of substances that could reveal more about what had occurred. Rex remained in the house during the analysis, alert and watchful. His behavior never wavered, signaling that their work was uncovering something real, something hidden beneath the surface. as the day progressed. The officers reviewed the girl's diary and letters once more. They compared the writings with the observations from the house and the hidden items in the basement. The pattern became more disturbing. The little girl had been trying to communicate fear, frustration, and sadness in ways that no adult had fully recognized. The hidden items, the inconsistencies in statements, and the clues Rex had found all pointed toward a deeper truth. The girl had not been safe in her own home. Neighbors were interviewed again, this time more carefully. Teachers, friends, and local shopkeepers provided small but valuable details. One teacher recalled the girl being unusually quiet on a certain day, holding her notebook close and avoiding interaction. A neighbor mentioned seeing a person acting impatiently and angrily toward her, though they did not understand what had caused the behavior. Each tiny observation added to the larger picture. By mid-afternoon, the forensic results started to come in. Some of the fabrics from the basement and around the house showed traces that suggested attempts to hide evidence of harm. Nothing conclusive yet, but enough to indicate that further investigation was needed. The officers realized that the little girl had been living with danger in ways that were not immediately obvious. The diary and notes had hinted at it, but now the physical evidence confirmed it. The team decided to conduct a more detailed examination of the yard and surrounding property. Rex led them to a small shed in the backyard that had appeared ordinary before. Inside, they discovered remnants of materials that had been used in ways that could conceal items or activities. There were more notes, small toys, and scraps of paper, some containing partial messages from the girl. Each discovery reinforced the fact that someone had been trying to hide actions that caused her distress. The officers took the findings seriously. They began preparing to question extended family members and any close acquaintances who might have knowledge of the girl's daily life. They approached each interview carefully, understanding that people might be nervous, defensive, or unaware of the significance of their own actions. Rex accompanied them to each location, observing and reacting subtly when he sensed tension. His instincts had been proven accurate multiple times, and the officers trusted them completely. One evening, as the sun began to set, the team reviewed all the evidence collected so far. They had photographs, diary entries, letters, hidden items, and forensic reports. Each piece connected to another, revealing a troubling story of fear and concealment. The little girl had been living with distress that adults had failed to recognize, and the dog's persistent reaction at her funeral had been the first warning sign. Now, everything was coming together in a way that could finally explain what had happened. The officers planned the next day carefully. They knew it would involve confronting adults who might be responsible for causing fear or harm. They prepared questions, documented all evidence, and coordinated with the forensic team. They also ensured that Rex would be present, his instincts guiding them if anyone tried to hide the truth. Early the next morning, they returned to the house once again. The parents and other family members were present. The atmosphere was tense, and Rex remained alert, moving slowly around the room, but keeping his focus on the adults. The officers began by asking specific questions about routines, interactions, and events leading up to the girl's death. The responses were careful, sometimes hesitant, and occasionally contradictory. Rex's ears pricked up with every inconsistency. One officer noticed a small reaction. An adult flinched slightly when a particular question was asked. The dog reacted immediately, growling softly, his tail stiff. It was subtle, but to the trained eyes of the officers, it was significant. Rex had once again alerted them to a hidden truth. The officers gently pressed further, asking more detailed questions while remaining calm and professional. Slowly, pieces of the story began to emerge. The little girl had experienced moments of fear and anxiety that were caused by someone close to her. The adults present tried to explain away incidents, but the inconsistencies were too great to ignore. The officers documented everything carefully, knowing that each detail could be crucial in understanding the full situation. Rex continued to observe, his presence a constant reminder that instinct and attention to subtle signs could reveal what words alone could not dot as the investigation progressed. The team uncovered evidence that confirmed suspicions. Hidden spaces, discarded items, and subtle signs in the home pointed toward actions that had endangered the little girl. The diary, letters, and notes had hinted at this, but now physical evidence supported it. The little girl had been trying to communicate danger, and it had gone unnoticed until Rex's intervention at the funeral by late afternoon. The team gathered all findings in one place. They reviewed each clue, each observation, and each report. The story was becoming clear. The little girl had been living in fear, and someone in her life had caused that fear. Rex had led them to evidence that no one else would have noticed, from the hidden basement items to the subtle signs in her room. The dog's behavior had been the first signal of danger, and now it was clear why he had reacted so urgently. The officers knew that the next step would be critical. They needed to confront the adults responsible in a way that would bring the truth to light without causing unnecessary panic. They also needed to prepare for the possibility that more hidden details would emerge. The little girl's story was coming together piece by piece, revealing the danger she had faced and the courage she had shown in trying to be heard. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the small town, the officers reflected on the day's work. They had uncovered evidence, documented inconsistencies, and followed the instincts of a remarkable police dog. Rex had guided them through the investigation, helping to uncover a story that no human alone could have discovered. The little girl's attempts to communicate fear, her hidden notes, and the physical clues in the home had all been pieced together, revealing a clear and troubling picture. The town remained quiet, but within the walls of the police station, a sense of determination grew. The officers knew that the investigation was far from over, but they were now closer to understanding the full story. The little girl's life, though tragically short, was beginning to be understood in a way that honored her attempts to be heard. Every clue, every observation, and every instinctive reaction from Rex brought them closer to uncovering the shocking truth that had been hidden for too long. And so, the investigation continued, moving toward the final revelation. The little girl's fear, the hidden items, the inconsistencies, and the dog's urgent behavior had all led the officers to a critical point. The truth was within reach, and the shocking discovery that awaited would finally explain why. Rex had barked desperately at her coffin. The day began quietly in the small town, but inside the police station, the air was tense with anticipation. The officers knew that today could finally bring answers to the mystery that had haunted them since the funeral. Rex, the police dog, lay beside his handler, alert and attentive. He had guided them through every step of the investigation, and now it seemed that the final pieces of the puzzle were about to fall into place. The team gathered early, reviewing all the evidence they had collected over the past days. Letters, diary entries, hidden items, photographs, and forensic reports were laid out on the tables. Each piece told part of the story of the little girl's life, her joys, her fears, and the struggles she had faced in silence. The officers knew that this would be the day to confront the adults involved and finally uncover the full truth. They returned to the girl's house once more, taking care to move quietly and professionally. The parents and other family members were present, their faces pale and tense. The officers explained again that they were not there to make assumptions or accusations without proof. Their goal was to understand what had happened in the girl's final months and why Rex had reacted so strongly at her funeral. Rex sat nearby, his eyes scanning the room, every muscle tense and alert. The questioning began carefully. The officers asked about daily routines, interactions, and any incidents that might have caused distress. The adults responded cautiously, some glancing nervously at each other, others avoiding eye contact. Rex reacted to subtle cues, tiny movements, hesitation in speech, and brief flashes of fear or discomfort. Each reaction was noted by the officers, adding to the growing picture of the situation. After hours of careful questioning, small but significant admissions began to surface. One of the adults reluctantly described moments of anger and frustration directed toward the girl, moments that may have frightened her. Another admitted to neglecting small but important signs that the child needed help and comfort. While no one had intended for harm to come to the girl in the most extreme sense, their actions or inaction had created an environment of fear and uncertainty for her. The officers listened closely, documenting every detail. They were patient, understanding that people often downplay their own mistakes or fail to see the impact of their actions. Rex remained calm but focused, his presence a reminder that the little girl's instincts and attempts to communicate had been real. The dog had led them to this moment, and now the humans were uncovering the story. Piece by piece, the forensic evidence collected from the home and backyard shed provided further clarity. Hidden notes, personal items, and traces of substances suggested attempts to conceal incidents that had frightened the girl. The letters and diary entries added context, revealing her thoughts, fears, and desperate wishes for safety. The combination of physical evidence and personal writings confirmed that the girl had been living in a state of worry and distress that no adult had fully acknowledged. As the investigation progressed, the officers began to piece together a timeline of events. Small inconsistencies in statements were clarified with additional evidence, and every clue helped form a clearer understanding of the girl's life. It became apparent that she had been trying to signal for help in the only way she could, through words written in secret, through her behavior, and through the small hints left in her home. Rex's response at the funeral had been the first warning, and now the truth was emerging.